Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this session, we are going to talk about the Bullwhip effect. This is also called a demand multiplier effect. As you can see on the screen, we have at the bottom customers on the left hand side and manufacturer on the right hand side. So basically, the demand is traveling from customers all the way to the manufacturer. And as the demand travels, you can see in the above line that the product numbers go on to increase. They keep on increasing from the customer's end all the way to the manufacturer's end. So this is what is called bullwhip effect. So we'll talk about it in a bit. Let's move on to the next slide. This concept was first observed by the MIT's professor J. Wright Forrester back in 1958, and he named this phenomena industrial dynamics. According to him, the observation says that the inventories and the backlogs are naturally intended to absorb temporary fluctuations in orders so that costly production changes can be minimized, which is always the case, that we always have inventory on hand to account for or to meet any certain surge or any abnormal rise in demand or any unexpected rise in demand. So Jay found that the firm's own policies, sensible and rational from the perspective of the managers at each decision point, that means those policies were quite reasonably made. However, that led to substantial amplification or the rise of disturbances or perturbations in those orders received to be delivered, and instability for the system as a whole because of the rising orders that the company started to receive all the way from their intermediaries involved between them and the customers. So that is the wholesalers, starting from the retailers to the wholesalers to the manufacturers. So this phenomena is now known as the bullwhip effect. Then P&G worked on this, and they found that the same pattern was taking place regarding the demand for their very popular brand called Pampers. They examined the order rates for Pampers across the supply chain and found that although the purchase rate remained more or less steady at the customer's end, the variation of orders increased from the retailer to the customer. That is, as we move up the upstream market, so that variation keeps increasing. So here is what we have now here called the demand multiplier effect, which means that the increase in the demand variability as we move up the supply chain. So here is the depiction of that. As you can see, we move from the customer all the way to the manufacturer, that is moving up the supply chain from downstream market to the upstream market. So there on the customer's end or the end consumer, there's a little bit fluctuation that you can see along the line. That is the order quantity measured along the time, and specific time for that matter, could be months, could be weeks, could be quarters, and so on. And then that is translated on the retailer's end with a little bit more fluctuation. On the wholesaler end, it is even more fluctuation. And then on the manufacturer end, it is significant fluctuation. So that is showing us fluctuation for the quantity demanded, right? So on the next slide here, we can see the same graph, but it also shows us the stock levels. So on the consumer end, if you see there is a little rise, that little rise shows, if you can see here, this rise in stock level on the retailer's end. On the wholesaler end, it is a bit more steep, and on the manufacturer end, it is very significantly sharp or steep, as you can see here. So it not only impacts the order quantity, but also the stock levels in anticipation of meeting those orders, which on the retail, wholesale, and a manufacturer, and they think that the market is going to demand more in the future. So in anticipation of that rise, they make more stock available on their ends. So as a result, there is an exaggerated increase, not only in meeting those orders, but also in keeping stock levels. So coming back to the concept of the bullwhip effect, it is the tendency for larger order size fluctuations as orders are relayed through the supply chain from the customer to the manufacturer, or even further to the suppliers along the upstream. And it also creates unstable production schedules, expensive capacity change costs, underutilization, longer lead times, and obsolescence. Why? Because that leads to further overproduction. So as a result, after the surge, there's a lack of activity or lull period, and later on they discovered that this was the artificial surge in demand, which was not in actuality taking place. So as a result, lots of units are remain unsold, and then that further leads to obsolescence. That is, they become out of their performance time or their validity time, or during that period other products are launched, so they lose their relevance. So they become outdated basically. So damage can be minimized with supplier coordination and planning. So these are some of the root causes to be avoided for the bullwhip effect. Barriers in cooperation that leads to the bullwhip effect. Under each barrier, as shown here, barriers due to different initiatives that leads to local optimization of functions or partners in the chain. Local optimization, as we have talked about it earlier on, that a certain increase in demand leads to overstocking or over performance of meeting that demand, or a certain decline in demand leads to responsiveness, over responsiveness in keeping stock quantity lower, or they act in an excessive manner, uh, both ways, whether the demand goes up or declines. So that is where we overreact. That comes under local optimization. In fact, that is because of maybe one-off order that is increasing or decreasing. That is one of sort of a off the wall incident that just happens, and we just happen to take a note of that uh, event and over quantify it in order to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity. So as a result, we make the error in terms of local optimization. So we either overreact when the demand goes up, or when the demand goes down, and we, by overreacting, we cut down the supply as well. So in both cases, we hit the bullwhip effect. Uh, Another outcome of that local optimization is inconsistent initiative of sales staff. Barriers in information processing leads to demand basis on the orders and not on the actual demand, and that leads to denied access to full information. So there should be a proper communication channel between the manufacturer and their suppliers and the retailers, so that they have on the ground real situation available to them on a real time basis. Operative barriers that includes ordering in bulk, bundles or bulk ordering, that further leads to long delivery times, and that leads to speculative ordering that is just based on your gut instincts, hit and run method. Pricing barriers, sudden surge through discount and promotion and so on. And then organizational barriers, lack of trust. So you're just working in the dark, you don't know what to do because your clients are not going to share their sales forecast with you for obviously variety of reasons, to ensure that your competitors don't get that information from your suppliers. So that is where the trust factor comes in, trust deficit. So in a nutshell here, bull effect causes bullwhip effect leads to is caused by demand forecasting, rationing, order batching, price variation, lack of communication, and non-responsiveness. So if you work against that, resolving these issues, then you can overcome this effect. So now here, this is the overall depiction of planning process, and here we need to be more mindful about planning uh, on a real-time basis with our intermediaries along upstream markets, so that we can avoid bullwhip effect. The simplest way to control the bullwhip effect caused by forward buying and divergence is to reduce both the frequency and the level of wholesale price discounting. So now where we talk about purchasing based on some future expectation. So we strike a deal with our vendors in hopes that in the future that demand would be much higher. That is where the forwarding or the forward buying comes in. But in reality, when uh, this point comes, we realize that the demand has not increased as per expectation. So quite to the contrary, then we are stuck. So in this situation, it's better not to go to that extreme. So in order to avoid that, we have to have a real-time basis coordination with our suppliers. So how do you go about it? So there's a framework for supply chain coordination activity or initiatives that we should look into with and discuss with our vendors, where we should focus on information sharing, channel alignment, and operational efficiency. So these are the initiatives mentioned over here that we should take into account. Thank you very much.